The rust-colored dawn broke over the sleepy edges of Hadley Ridge, Arkansas, a quiet town carved out of old farmland and stubborn pine trees. It was the kind of place where porch swings creaked like lazy metronomes and morning coffee tasted better when sipped outdoors. Caleb Martin, a former Air Force security officer turned freelance architectural consultant, had returned to this rural escape after years of base transfers and deployments. All he wanted was stillness, land that didn't buzz with rules and faces that didn't scrutinize. His porch, nestled at the edge of a gently sloping lawn, was his sanctuary. That Saturday morning, Caleb wore his worn Air Force hoodie, cup of black coffee steaming in one hand, and boots kicked up onto the top step. His golden retriever, Max, snoozed beside him, the soft snore of a dog content to age in peace. There was a kind of healing in the simplicity. That is, until chaos in the shape of a woman named Karen Whitlow decided to arrive. She came stomping down the cul-de-sac like a suburban storm in pastel armor. Bright pink sneakers, lime green blazer, a clipboard so aggressively clutched it looked like an extension of her hand. Her sunglasses were oversized, her haircut severe, and her walk radiated the self-importance of someone who had never truly been told no. "You there? Get off that porch. This is a community entry point, not your personal relaxation space," she screeched, pointing a trembling finger like she was casting a hex. Caleb blinked. The coffee hadn't even cooled, and already this woman was attempting an exorcism on him from his own steps. "I'm sorry," he said, squinting at her. "You can't just loiter in shared zones," she huffed, gesturing at his porch as if it were a public gazebo. "I built this porch with my bare hands," Caleb replied calmly. "The lumber store still sends me holiday cards." Karen clicked her pen like it was the trigger to a nuclear device and produced a flyer that looked like it was made in PowerPoint 2003. Comic Sans, clip art of a gavel, a few made-up statutes about visual harmony guidelines. "I'm the interim president of the Hadley Ridge Transitional HOA Committee," she announced proudly. "We're initiating compliance protocols." Caleb almost snorted. "There is no HOA here." Karen didn't flinch. "There will be. Consider this a notice of behavioral misalignment. I am issuing a verbal order of removal." Max, the dog, lifted his head and let out a low growl. Even he knew this was lunacy. Caleb stood slowly. Not from fear. He'd faced down armed insurgents in the desert. But because in today's world, standing too fast around people like Karen could land you in handcuffs on a viral video. "You need to leave my property now," he said, "before I call the sheriff." Karen smirked. "Go ahead. Better yet, I'll call our compliance officer." She dialed a number on speaker. A gravelly voice answered. "Yeah? Greg, we have a violation. Unauthorized porch occupation at Lot 19. Deploy enforcement." "On my way," the voice said. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Is that an auto shop behind him?" She smiled triumphantly. "Our certified compliance officer is en route." "You're in big trouble, sir." Caleb, unshaken, pulled out his phone and typed a message into his old Air Force group chat. "Some woman's trying to evict me from my own porch. Feel like dropping by?" Within a minute, the chat was lit. "Be there in 15. Uniform or civvies? Do I bring flags? Got donuts?" 15 minutes later, the first car rolled up. Out stepped Victor Shaw, former military police and current sheriff's deputy. Tall, stone-faced, with the kind of stride that made people instinctively check their speedometers. He hugged Caleb and turned toward Karen. "Ma'am," he said flatly, "you got business here?" Karen beamed. "Yes. He's violating HOA porch guidelines." Victor removed his sunglasses slowly. "There's no HOA here. And if you keep handing out fake citations, you're going to find yourself facing real charges." Karen went pale, but the gears in her head kept turning. 2 more vehicles arrived. First was Jackson, now working with the U.S. Marshals. Then Eli, a federal prosecutor who used to be Caleb's bunkmate. In minutes, Caleb's porch had turned into a full-blown veteran reunion. Karen stood rooted on the sidewalk, her mouth agape, watching her imaginary kingdom fall to pieces. But she didn't retreat. No, Karen doubled down. By noon, flyers littered mailboxes and telephone poles, each one poorly printed and alarmingly dramatic. Emergency HOA meeting, community violation at Lot 19. There was even a grainy photo of Caleb sipping coffee. Unauthorized occupation of community space, it read. Caleb couldn't help but laugh. He gathered the flyers and showed them to the others. This is what dictatorship looks like when it has access to inkjet printers, Eli said. But the day wasn't done. Greg, the self-proclaimed compliance officer, arrived in a dented sedan with a plastic security sticker on the windshield and a reflective vest 4 sizes too large. He sauntered up the porch, clearing his throat dramatically. "Sir," he declared, "you are hereby cited under Section 3.2 of the Community Harmony Act." "What the hell is Section 3.2? Caleb asked. "Visual uniformity violation," Greg said solemnly. Victor stepped forward. "Let me see your ID." Greg hesitated, then handed over what appeared to be a laminated gym membership card with his name scrawled on the back in Sharpie. Victor gave Caleb a look. "He's serious." Caleb stood his ground. "You want me to leave my own porch? You'll need more than a gym card and a fantasy HOA." Greg faltered. Karen was filming from across the street again. But when Victor pulled out a cease and desist letter, one Eli had pre-written for fun, they both fled like kids caught sneaking into a movie theater. But Karen wasn't finished. The first time Caleb heard real sirens that day, he figured someone else on the block must have dialed 911. Maybe a heart attack or a fender bender. But when he saw Karen jogging, yes, actually jogging toward the arriving cruisers with her phone raised like it was a subpoena, he realized this was her next move. She pointed wildly, shouted something about military occupation and unauthorized men in tactical gear. The officers, 2 of them, stepped out with professional posture. Not hostile, not amused either. Just the kind of tired authority that comes with having already seen the worst parts of humanity and hoping today wouldn't add to that list. Caleb stood from his porch, dusted off his hoodie, and approached with the calm of someone who's faced down far worse. "Morning, officers," he said, offering a handshake. "My name's Caleb Martin. This is my property. That woman's been trying to invent an HOA and evict me from my own porch." The taller of the 2, a corporal with a no-nonsense build and a careful look in his eyes, returned the handshake. "Corporal Gaines," he said. But his tone changed. His head tilted. A flicker of recognition sparked. Caleb narrowed his eyes. "Ryan." Ryan grinned. "Holy hell. It's been what, 7 years? Cuner Province?" The handshake became a backslap. The 2 men embraced like only brothers in arms do, brief, firm, silent, but loaded with history. Karen, from the sidewalk, looked like she'd just watched a soap opera plot twist live. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. The officers conferred briefly, then approached Karen. Caleb didn't hear all the words, but he saw enough. The shift in her posture, the confused frown, the realization creeping across her face like a slow spill of ink. The HOA didn't exist. Her flyers were nonsense. Her compliance officer, Greg, wasn't anything more than a man with a printer and a vest. The porch she tried to claim wasn't public. It was deeded land, with documentation, and now legal witnesses. But instead of admitting defeat, Karen stormed off, muttering about county appeals and upper jurisdiction, whatever that meant. Ryan gave Caleb a wink before climbing back into his cruiser. "You always did attract weirdos." Caleb chuckled. "Neighborhood picked me." But Ryan's visit planted a seed. That evening, Caleb booted up his laptop and dove headfirst into local property records, zoning ordinances, and council minutes. He expected a dead end, or maybe some obscure clause Karen had misread. Instead, he found gold. 2 months ago, a petition had been filed with the county. The applicant? Karen Whitlow. The proposal? To form a homeowners association for Hadley Ridge, with Karen listed as acting president. The proposal had been denied. Flatly. No legal standing. No approval. She'd been trying to fake it, banking on fear, confusion, and the appearance of authority. But she had no legitimacy. Even more incredible? She wasn't even a homeowner. Her name wasn't on the deed of the house across the street. She was renting. A tenant. A loud, destructive, increasingly erratic tenant. And there was more. 3 prior noise complaints, 1 permit violation, and an open civil dispute regarding unapproved landscaping that had destroyed a neighbor's water main. "This isn't about HOA law," Caleb muttered aloud. "It's about control." The next morning confirmed it. Hammering. Not construction. Not from a neighbor doing repairs. It was Karen, in broad daylight, driving wooden stakes into the ground on the edge of Caleb's lawn. He stepped outside, steaming coffee in hand, Max yawning behind him, and watched. Karen stood triumphant in a bright purple visor and a custom T-shirt that read, "President, Founding HOA Committee." She had tied red caution tape between the stakes, and at the center was a laminated paper with more of her trademark Comic Sans declarations. She turned and raised a hand like a traffic cop. "This is a restricted transition zone," she announced. "Per the pre-charter community agreement, your porch is currently under review for reassignment." Caleb blinked. "You're building imaginary borders." Karen held up the laminated sheet. "As acting president, I am authorized to mark pre-integrated zones for visual harmony." "You can't integrate what you don't own," Caleb said. But she spun on her heel and marched back to her house like she'd just delivered a royal decree. That was it. Caleb grabbed his phone and texted the unit chat again. Operation Porch Shield. Green light. An hour later, the street changed. Mike, former federal investigator, rolled up first, with a box of donuts and a smile like he'd been waiting for this moment. Then Tyler arrived, the cybersecurity analyst, bringing a drone, a tripod, and the drywood of a man who could take down a darknet empire with a keystroke. Finally, Evan showed up. A former medic turned MP, still in uniform, with a collapsible chair slung under one arm and a thermos in the other. They set up on the porch like it was game day. Lawn chairs, coffee, donuts, even a mini speaker playing Sinatra. Karen reemerged, wide-eyed. She marched across the street, red-faced. "You can't do this. You're staging a military intimidation tactic." Tyler's drone took off, whirring overhead, filming the stakes, the tape, the laminated decree. "This isn't a protest," Evan said, smiling. "It's a porch party." Karen tried again. Greg returned, this time with a media partner, wearing a golf polo and a cheap camcorder. "You're being documented," Greg declared. Caleb stood and calmly hit record on his own phone. "You sure about that? Last time you did this, it didn't end well." Mike handed Greg a printed cease and desist letter. "You are impersonating an authority, issuing unlawful threats, and engaging in coordinated harassment," Mike said. "This letter outlines the statutes. Want to add mail fraud to the list?" Greg hesitated. Looked at Karen. Karen screamed, "Stand your ground." Greg left. So did the cameraman. Karen stayed. For a moment. Then turned, shoulders heavy, words sputtering into nothing. And then fate struck again. Her car, a beat-up sedan half on Caleb's lawn and half in front of a fire hydrant, was being hooked by a city tow truck. A retired firefighter neighbor had made the call. The driver shrugged as Karen screeched, "You can't do this." But the truck pulled away. It was poetic. Symbolic. The sound of rubber over asphalt, carrying away the last illusion of her imaginary throne. The porch remained. Stronger. Quietly defiant. And for the first time since Caleb moved to Hadley Ridge, the neighbors began to wave. Some even brought peach cobbler. A single porch had become a beacon, not just of resistance, but of what happens when you stand up without shouting, when you fight not with fists but with facts. But it wasn't over. The next morning, a white envelope arrived. Legal notice. Karen was suing Caleb. The envelope was thick, overstuffed like a Thanksgiving turkey full of delusion. Caleb flipped it over in his hands, eyebrows raised as he scanned the bold-stamped words, "Legal notice, small claims filing." Inside was a mess, page after page of poorly formatted paragraphs accusing him of emotional terrorism, militarized loitering, and unauthorized occupation of HOA-aligned space. Karen had requested $15,000 in damages and, more absurdly, a mandatory porch relocation. Caleb burst out laughing. "Relocate the porch," he muttered to Max. "What does she think this is, modular furniture?" But beneath the humor was something darker. Karen had crossed a new line. She was trying to take the fight into a courtroom, even if the courtroom didn't recognize her fantasy HOA. This wasn't about fines anymore. It was about rewriting reality, and she was determined to drag him into her fictional world. He didn't waste a second. He forwarded the entire packet to Mike and Vince, his former squad mate, now a decorated JAG officer with a private practice in Little Rock. Vince had spent most of the past decade building legal cases for veterans wrongfully evicted from their homes. Karen didn't know it yet, but she'd just declared war on the one man who wrote military-grade litigation for breakfast. Vince called within the hour. "She wrote this herself," he said, nearly choking on laughter. "It reads like a high school civics essay. No standing, no cited law, and every single claim contradicts public records." Still, Vince insisted on responding formally. "She wants a courtroom? We'll give her paperwork she can't print at Kinko's." Within 2 days, Vince assembled a response that was nothing short of a legal sledgehammer. It included a copy of Caleb's deed with property lines clearly marked, High-resolution drone footage showing Karen trespassing and planting her fake HOA markers. Screenshots of Karen's own Facebook comments, where she admitted the HOA was in its early stages of planning. 3 signed witness statements from neighbors confirming her fake notices and confrontations. Greg's gym membership, ID, photo as part of the evidence folder. And the cherry on top, a highlighted passage from the county zoning board denying her HOA application, stamped, dated, and certified. The court rejected Karen's complaint in under 72 hours. No hearing, no mediation, just a typed ruling at the bottom of a single sheet. No legal HOA present. Respondent owns the property in question. No actionable violation exists. Caleb grinned reading it. That's one battle done. But Karen? She wasn't done. She never admitted defeat. 3 days later, Caleb awoke to a protest. Or, rather, an attempt at one. 3 families stood awkwardly on the sidewalk outside his house holding hand-drawn signs. One read, "In porch occupation," another said, "Protect our vision," and the third simply said, "Neighborhood peace," with neighborhood spelled wrong. It was comical, like watching a school play staged by people who had never read the script. The protesters weren't shouting. They weren't even chanting. They stood there like they'd been promised snacks, and no one delivered. Caleb sat on his porch, coffee in hand, flanked by Mike and Vince. "Do they know the HOA isn't real?" Vince asked. "I think they just don't want to tell Karen." "No," Caleb replied. The irony, of course, was that none of these families had lived in Hadley Ridge for more than 6 months. Karen had likely told them Caleb was some rogue squatter or radical troublemaker. The truth was, the only radical thing about him was how stubbornly he refused to move from a porch he legally built. The protest fizzled by lunchtime. One of the families peeled off early. Another left quietly with a shrug. The third walked over awkwardly to apologize and handed Caleb a tin of oatmeal cookies with a handwritten note. "We didn't know. Sorry for the confusion." But Karen's fantasy empire was about to take a bigger hit. That evening, Caleb received a message from a Real HOA board member from a neighboring subdivision, Oak Pines Preserve, a gated community several miles away. Karen, it turned out, had been using their logo on her flyers, claiming she was in merger talks with them, even referring to herself as regional liaison. The board wasn't amused. They sent Karen a formal cease and desist letter demanding she stop using their name, remove all flyers, and post a public retraction. Karen responded with a YouTube video. Wearing a cardigan, oversized earrings, and a trembling voice, she blamed the mix-up on shared community goals and misinterpreted branding synergy. The video was 5 minutes of rambling nonsense, interspersed with legal terms used incorrectly and dramatic pauses where she seemed to forget her point. The comments section was brutal, and that's when her so-called support collapsed. The same 3 families who had stood on the sidewalk holding signs the day before, they unfriended her. One even sent Caleb a message privately. "We were misled. Please don't lump us in with her. We want peace." That night, the guys decided it was time to make a statement, not for Karen, but for the community. They visited the local hardware store, bought a steel flagpole, a ring of solar lights, and a fresh bag of mulch. By morning, it stood proudly in Caleb's yard, 2 flags fluttering in the breeze, the stars and stripes, and beneath it, the U.S. Air Force flag. Neighbors came out to watch. Some clapped. A few took pictures. One elderly man, a Vietnam vet, saluted and whispered, "That's the best thing I've seen on this street in 20 years. Across the street, Karen watched from her window. Arms folded. Clipboard untouched. For the first time, she didn't storm. She didn't yell. She just stared. And then, she vanished. 2 days later, her landlord, a quiet man who lived in Florida, made a call to Caleb. He'd seen the protest clips online, the fake HOA drama, the tow truck scene. He'd had no idea his tenant was impersonating an entire governing body or exposing his property to legal liability. She received her termination letter that same evening. Violation of lease terms, instigating community conflict, misrepresentation. And just like that, the queen of the imaginary HOA was dethroned by her own lies. The U-Haul rumbled off just before dusk, carrying the last battered pieces of Karen Whitlow's collapsed delusion. Caleb didn't wave. He didn't smile. He simply sat on his porch as he always did. Hoodie on, coffee in hand, Max curled up at his feet like a sentinel. No cheers erupted. No car horns honked. And yet, something in the air shifted. Something broke free. The street exhaled. That night, the porch light hummed above Caleb as he watched the stars bloom across the sky. The The flags flapped gently in the breeze, casting long shadows across the lawn. For the first time in weeks, the neighborhood was quiet, not just in sound, but in spirit. The next morning, a small surprise awaited him. A peach cobbler, still warm, left on the porch with a handwritten note taped to the foil. "Thank you for defending the porch. The Atkins family." More came. Lemon bars, a jar of pickles, a fresh loaf of bread. The quiet neighbors, the ones who had kept their heads down during Karen's reign, began to emerge. They stopped by. They waved. They lingered. A pair of retirees even brought over folding chairs and sat for an hour in silence, just enjoying the peace. Caleb had never tried to be a symbol, but the porch had become one. Without any plan or committee or HOA decree, it had become Freedom Watch. He heard the name for the first time from a teenager walking his dog. "You heading over to Freedom Watch later?" the kid asked his friend. Caleb chuckled under his breath. It stuck. Within days, the porch wasn't just his, it was theirs. A gathering place, a landmark, a rally point that didn't need a sign. No banners, no declarations, just people being people again. Jack, the sheriff deputy, would swing by after a shift with breakfast sandwiches and updates on town gossip. Tyler dropped off a USB stick labeled Operation Porch Shield, a slickly edited compilation of drone footage, neighborhood Facebook posts, and Karen's YouTube apology, complete with dramatic music and blooper clips of Greg's failed citations. One night, they projected it on the side of the garage. The whole block showed up: lawn chairs, coolers, dogs, kids on scooters. Laughter erupted during the tow truck scene. Applause broke out when the flagpole was raised. No one mentioned Karen by name, but everyone felt it, the weight of her absence and the strength of what remained. A few weeks later, Caleb received an unannounced visitor. The sedan was dark blue, immaculate. The man who stepped out was older, broad-shouldered, in a crisp blazer that carried the sharpness of military tailoring. His steps were slow but purposeful, boots polished, expression unreadable. Caleb stood as the man approached. Max stirred but didn't bark. The man extended a hand. "Colonel Whitaker," he said. "Retired. I served 32 years in the Corps. One of your old squad mates sent me your story." They shook hands, firm and steady. They sat, talked shop, shared stories only military men could tell, laughed about Karen's imaginary army and Greg's laminated gym card. And then, without fanfare, the colonel reached into his blazer and pressed something into Caleb's palm. It was heavy, a solid bronze challenge coin, engraved with the eagle, globe, and anchor. "You reminded people what silent strength looks like," Whitaker said softly. "That matters." Caleb didn't say much after that. He didn't need to. The coin meant more than any medal. It was respect from someone who understood what it meant to take a stand without taking up arms, to win without domination. That coin stayed in Caleb's pocket from that day forward. And with it came a final act, one he had put off for too long. He started building a proper fence. Not a barricade, not a warning, a boundary. Solid wood, clean lines, a fresh coat of deep walnut stain. He installed motion sensors at each corner, more for wildlife than people. And at the main gate, he mounted a single carved sign: "Private property. Trespassers will be removed by the owner or his unit." Neighbors chuckled, took pictures. Some even posted it online with hashtags like #PorchSquad and #FreedomWatchArkansas. But no one misread it. It wasn't about ego. It was about peace, earned, established, and respected. As summer deepened, the lawn grew lush. The porch saw cookouts, movie nights, fire pit gatherings, and impromptu celebrations. A young couple got engaged on the porch during a 4th of July potluck. Kids used the fence to prop up lemonade stands. The town mayor showed up one evening just to shake hands and eat pulled pork. Karen's name faded, not with erasure, but with irrelevance. And without anyone meaning to, the porch had become a story, a legend. Did you hear about the guy who stopped a fake HOA with donuts and drone footage? Yeah, Freedom Watch. It's real. Even delivery drivers got in on the story. One day a pizza arrived, with a sticky note attached: "Respect to the Porch Patrol." And yet, for all the noise and memory, the message stayed quiet. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing Karen. It was about what happens when people stand up with calm, with facts, with community behind them and strength within them. One evening, As the sky blushed gold and the last light painted the porch steps in amber, Caleb found himself alone again. Max lay at his feet, older now, snoring peacefully. The flag swayed gently above. He sipped his coffee. The same cup, the same seat, the same porch. But everything was different. Because now, it wasn't just his porch. It was everyone's. And when new neighbors moved in and asked about the flagpole or the gate sign, someone would always tell the story. About the time a woman tried to rule a street she didn't own. About a porch that became a line in the sand. About a man who never had to shout to be heard. The final chapter didn't arrive with fireworks. No last showdown. No front-page headlines. Just silence, gentle, steady, and earned. Caleb Martin's porch no longer needed to prove anything. It stood as it always had, with grain worn smooth by years of footsteps, laughter, coffee spills, and hard conversations. But now it held something deeper: legacy. The story had spread beyond Hadley Ridge. First, it appeared in a regional military appreciation newsletter. Then in a local journalist's human interest blog. Then, unexpectedly, it caught the eye of a national podcast focused on everyday resistance stories, the kind that didn't involve protests in the streets, but porch lights, folding chairs, and quiet defiance. They called Caleb a symbol of modern calm courage, but he didn't buy into titles. "I just didn't move," he said during the interview. Sometimes that's all it takes. Still, the story traveled. Veterans reached out from other towns. A group of retired Coast Guardsmen in Oregon sent a photo of their own porch, now dubbed Checkpoint Cedar. A retired Navy cook in Florida built a replica of Caleb's sign and emailed, "Hope you don't mind the copy. Ours says, trespassers will be removed with kindness or coffee." Caleb responded to every message. He sent photos of the porch. Max. The flagpole. He never spoke ill of Karen by name. Never mocked her publicly. She had faded, like fog at sunrise, and he saw no reason to revive her ghost. Instead, he focused on the people who mattered. The kids who now rode their bikes in loops around his driveway like it was a racetrack. The older couple who came every Tuesday to play checkers on the porch table. The woman down the street who, after years of keeping to herself, now brought cookies and joined fire pit chats under the stars. And old Max, who moved slower now but never missed a gathering, always found the sunniest spot to nap near Caleb's boots. His fur had grayed, his eyes a little dimmer, but his loyalty remained fierce as ever. One afternoon in late September, the group gathered for an unofficial Freedom Watch anniversary. No one planned it. No one sent invites. People just showed up, because that's what they did now. The grill was lit. Someone brought a projector and a screen again. Kids played tag. Veterans swapped stories. Even the mayor returned, this time with a donation to plant 2 oak trees near the flagpole. It was a celebration of community forged in resistance, not the loud, angry kind, but the patient kind. The porch kind. As the sun dipped behind the tree line, Caleb stood, holding a mug, and looked around at the faces that now formed the fabric of his neighborhood. Not because of zoning, or regulations, or compliance, but because of coffee and courage and the refusal to be bullied. He didn't make a speech. That wasn't his style. But he tapped the flagpole twice, raised his cup, and said, "This porch will always be open, except to fake HOAs and clipboard tyrants." Laughter echoed through the yard. That night, after the chairs were folded and the string lights powered down, Caleb sat alone again. Just him, the porch, and Max snoring softly beside him. He looked out across the lawn, the fence lit by soft solar glows, the flag fluttering in a gentle wind, the sign at the gate just visible in the moonlight. He didn't feel victorious. Not in the way people often mean it. He felt right. He had chosen not to escalate, not to back down. He'd chosen to be present, not just on a porch, but in a community. He thought about Karen, not with anger, not even with resentment. Just a quiet curiosity. What drove people to believe power came from pretending they had it? What might have happened if she'd sat down on the porch instead of trying to conquer it? But those thoughts faded with the breeze. Because this wasn't her story anymore. It belonged to the porch, and the people who stood with it. Caleb took one last sip of coffee, leaned back in his chair, and whispered the words he'd spoken once before, but now with something closer to peace in his voice. Some folks really do learn the hard way. And this time, he smiled not just for himself, but for all the porches still standing, in all the quiet neighborhoods, with people just like him, who simply refused to be moved.